The Limping Ghost. On the coast between Port Quin and Polzeath, a well-lighted studio with living accommodation. Reasonable terms. Apply Box 209. That was how the advertisement read, and it seemed to be the very thing I was seeking. I wrote into the box number, and 2 days later received a reply signed Mary Trewalla. The terms were indeed reasonable, and I took the studio for the months of August and September. Business with my solicitor delayed me in London until the 3rd of August, and it was on the 5th of the month by the time I got down to Pentire Court. It was a rambling old farmhouse with a studio obviously built on with an eye to commercial benefits. The Trewallas interested me. The husband must have been over 70, while his wife was hardly more than 30. There was one servant, a little slip of a thing, who seemed to be frightened of her own shadow. It was she who took me into the studio. The place was pleasant enough, well lighted, and with a fine view of the sea from the windows on the northern side. An excellent dinner was served about 7 o'clock, and afterwards I thought I'd take a stroll down to the nearest village. When the little maid came in to clear the table, I asked which was the best way to go, in the direction of Port Quin or towards Polzeath. "Lol, sir," she exclaimed, "don't 'ee be going to Port Quin? 'Tis only a ruin. Nan's lived there since the fishing fleet was sunk years and years ago." So I walked down to Polzeath, a quiet little holiday resort of a few hotels and a couple of shops on a wide bay. There was nothing else. I couldn't even find a pub, and after sitting by the sea for about an hour, I returned to Pentire Court. The house was in darkness. Evidently the family had gone to bed, and I thought I might as well do likewise. My sleeping quarters were above the studio, and access was gained to the room by a wooden ladder. It's my habit to read in bed, and I must have been reading for an hour or more when I heard somebody in the studio below. I could hear the footsteps quite plainly, and as I listened it seemed to me that the person, whoever it was limping. It was an uncanny sound at that hour of the night, and I didn't feel too easy when I heard the footsteps mount the ladder. To be quite truthful, I lay in cold perspiration waiting for the visitor to enter the bedroom, but the sound suddenly ceased. After all, it might be only old Mr. Trewalla come over from the house for something. The thought cheered me, and I jumped out of bed, seized my lamp, and went over to the trapdoor. There was no one there. I went down into the studio, but it was quite empty, and the door was fast. Thoroughly mystified, I returned to bed. In the morning I asked the maid if anyone had entered the studio during the night, but she assured me that such a thing was impossible. "Then is there," I asked, "any lame person round about here, any person who limps as he walks?" Her face went white, and I thought she was going to faint. However, she pulled herself together and replied, "No, sir, leastwise not now. There was young Mr. Mason, who rented this studio last year. He was lame." "And where is Mr. Mason now?" Sir, there's a few would like to be knowing that. He disappeared, sir." "Disappeared? What do you mean?" "Well, sir," was the answer, "I'll tell you all I know about it, but please don't let on to the master and missus that I've told you." I assured her that I wouldn't repeat a word of the story, and she went on, "Young Mr. Mason was here for nearly 3 months, and master suspected he got on too familiar terms with the missus. There was a frightful row about it. Mr. Mason was told to clear out. I heard it all from the kitchen. Master was fair blazing, and Mr. Mason said, 'Yes, I'll go, but I'm taking Mary with me.' 'Then you'll take her to hell,' yelled the master. That afternoon I went into Wadebridge. When I got back, Mr. Mason had gone. That's all there is to tell, sir, except some folks came here asking for him. It seems that he never went back to London." I did no painting that day, but I managed to see quite a lot of Mr. and Mrs. Trewalla. The old man puzzled me. He talked religion, but that didn't prevent him from bringing out a whisky bottle, and I noticed he drank large quantities of the stuff without water. Mrs. Trewalla seemed to be in fear of her husband all the time, and if ever a woman's eyes held a world of suffering and sorrow, hers did. Late in the afternoon I went over to Wadebridge, admired Lovibond's wonderful 14th century bridge, and decided to dine at one of the hotels. It was nearly 11 o'clock by the time I got back to the farm, and the place was in darkness. I was just inserting the key in the studio lock when I heard those limping footsteps. Backwards and forwards they went inside, just as if a lame man were pacing the room. I threw the door open and flashed my electric torch up and down, but there was no one there. The place was empty. The night passed quietly enough, and I was up early in the morning, determined to make a start on some work. I'd already made up my mind to paint the seascape from the northern window, and soon had my canvas in position and my paints mixed. I got the groundwork on all right, and then a strange thing happened. I thought I heard those limping footsteps coming up behind me, but a glance convinced me that the room was empty. Then I felt a light touch on my hand. It was just as if another hand closed over mine, and I found myself painting not the wide sweep of the Cornish sea, but the interior of a large cave. I must have worked for over 2 hours when my hand was suddenly released, and I stepped back to look at the canvas. It was a picture of a sandy-floored cave, and rough shelves were cut into the rocky sides. Thoroughly puzzled, I left the place and went for a walk along the cliffs. I was out for fully an hour, and when I returned I had another shock. The picture was still on the easel, but someone had been working at it. A figure of a man had been painted in, and I had no difficulty in recognizing Mr. Trewalla. He had a spade in his hands and had evidently just finished burying something. As I looked at it, I heard, quite close at hand, that limping footstep. The next 2 days were a nightmare. Wherever I went I heard that phantom tread. It was with me in the studio. It followed me along the cliffs. On the 3rd day, still incapable of attempting any work, I thought I'd go into Polzeath and bathe. I set off along the cliff path, and was well on my way before I heard the footsteps. Then they seemed to be running as if they wanted to overtake me, and it was a limping, awkward sort of running. All at once I felt my arm seized gently but firmly, and I was led down a little track on the side of the cliff. At the bottom was a sandy cove, and in the rock to one side was the entrance to a great cave. The unseen hand propelled me towards the cavern, and then released me. There was something familiar about that cave, and though I was terrified, I went inside. It was the cavern I'd already seen on the canvas, with the same sandy floor, and the shelves round the sides, shelves I've since discovered used by the old smugglers for storing contraband. The cave was very dry, evidently well above the level of high tide. I stood there gazing around, and suddenly there came the limping footsteps once more. My arm was seized again, and I was led farther into the cave to a spot at the end, the very place where Trewalla was standing in the painting. Here the sand seemed to be slightly heaped up. Something was sticking up out of it, and as I scraped it away to see what it could be, I saw one of those surgical boots worn by lame people, and there was a foot inside it. Feeling horribly sick, I raced out into the sunshine, up the cliff and over to the main road. There was a bus going to Wadebridge. I boarded it, and within half an hour was telling the police of my discovery. Most of my readers will remember how old John Trewalla was convicted of the murder of Henry Mason. The whole story was revealed in the press. The man was maddened by the friendship between his wife and young Mason. When he tackled the young artist about it, Mason threatened to take Mary Trewalla away. In the afternoon, the old man lured Mason down to the cove and murdered him, afterwards burying the body in the cave. How much Mrs. Trewalla knew, I do not know, but I'm certain that she suspected the crime, and that's why she was so frightened of her husband. The strangest part is yet to be told. When I went back to the studio to collect my belongings, I naturally went to pack the picture. The only paint on the canvas was the groundwork I'd put on it in preparation for my seascape.